Hey there, KNEO listeners. This is Luke Taylor, and we just want to give a special broadcast to you this morning. And we want to do this to keep our listeners informed about some things that are going to be on the ballot this November. And so to do that, we have asked our local Senator Jill Carter to come and speak to our listeners here. And so she's here at the station today to chat with you and let you know about Amendment 3 that's going to be on the ballot this November. And so, Senator Carter, thank you so much for coming and speaking to our listeners today.
Hey, Luke, thank you so much for having me. It's a great opportunity to talk about such an important issue, and I appreciate it. Yeah.
And also, you just got back from a trip to the border, not the border of Missouri, but the U.S. border.
Yes, I did.
Maybe we could start there and just tell us what you learned on that trip.
Where to begin, right? I went down. I always am really hesitant to talk about something that I don't really understand or don't know. You know, we see on social media a lot, or the news, kind of this back and forth, polarizing conversation about what's going on in our border. And so it was difficult to really speak to it. Obviously, we want border security, but to actually know what was going on and to see it for yourself was life-altering. To see... I was sharing you with before we went on the air, to see that going down there on the border patrol, going down there, hanging out with the border patrol, seeing how these people are just coming across. Mm-hmm. They have to, because of the regulations of the federal government right now, they have to process people into our country. So it's very difficult for them to turn them away. And so a lot of these countries where these people are coming from are communist countries or countries that are adversarial to the U.S. And because they are adversarial, they do not have an agreement to share information on background checks on some of them. Mm-hmm. And so whatever they say their name is what goes down as documentation for them to be processed at the border.
They don't have to give their real name. They don't have to show any proof of who they actually are.
They do not. And so it goes, like I said, they write it down. They pass them off to NGOs mm-hmm. that pick them up, take them to a processing center themselves, kind of get them food, clothing, shelter, all of that. Mm-hmm. And that is where they wait and kind of are in holding until they get their travel, whether it's their bus tickets or their plane tickets. And then they're just dropped off wherever they send them. And so to see it kind of from beginning to end and talk about fentanyl coming across our border, the cartels taking over, to talk about how these guys are just pouring in. You know, I stopped at the border in one place. We just kind of helped ourselves. There was a handful of us, and we just kind of helped ourselves to the border a little bit, and went out there investigating. And we talked to one farmer who gave me his number and said, "Come back. I will show you what happens at night." Mm-hmm. And so, like I said, it was just where to begin. It is such a complex issue mm-hmm. and something that absolutely needs addressed. And if our federal government is not willing to take a stand, then it is up to the states to do something to de-incentivize this kind of action that's being perpetuated onto us. Mm-hmm. And to secure the safety of our communities, I think is of utmost importance. And to not do it is just derelict.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned the NGOs a minute ago. So those are non-government organizations?
Yes.
Who are these organizations, and what's their role that they're playing in all this?
So it's hard to talk about this because these are people that we typically think of partners. They're compassionate organizations, typically, Catholic Charities being one of them. They are these NGOs, that non-government organizations, mostly churches, compassionate organizations that work to help people in crisis, things like that are getting paid to facilitate or to house and then to transport mm-hmm. People to relocate them.
They could relocate them to Joplin, Missouri.
They are relocating them to Joplin.
So, and they're getting paid. Are they getting paid by the government?
Yes, they are.
So they're a non-government organization. Our government's not necessarily busing these people out directly all over the U.S., but they're using
the NGOs.
Okay.
And that is one of the hardest things to talk about because we don't like to see organizations like that. At least I don't. It's mm-hmm. uncomfortable to say, hey, these NGOs are facilitating this. Mm-hmm. I mean, who wants to start talking about these NGOs that are trying to do compassionate Christian work, mm-hmm. Being the ones facilitating and compromising the safety of our communities? That's a difficult conversation to have.
Wow. Have you ever been down to the border before this?
I lived in El Paso, Texas as a kid. And so I lived there 3 or 4 years. before I came here, living right outside El Paso.
Okay.
And so we would often go to Juarez and things like that. The culture there obviously is very different. It's one of the reasons why I say that I love Southwest Missouri. As a 14-year-old who came from that culture where you had fence and barbed wire around your school, and gangs that were predominant, and you were the minority, and you come up here to Southwest Missouri where people wave to you going down the road, it was an absolute culture shift. And I joke about this when I talk to people, but I say, one of the things that just got my heart when I first moved here as a 14-year-old was driving down the road and seeing people's, one finger goes up, two fingers goes up as they pass you in the vehicle. And I remember thinking, what gang sign is that? Literally. And then going to school and asking somebody, what does this mean? What's the hand in the air when you pass? And they're like, they're waving. And I remember thinking, I will never leave this place. I mean, the way that we take care of each other in this community is something that needs to not be taken for granted. And you see a culture shift where people used to acclimate and become American when they come here. That is not the case anymore. And so that's evident on the border. That's evident in other places. Like I said, the cartels. We were able to hang out and be with, like I said, Border Patrol sheriffs from many counties along the border, even sheriffs in North Carolina, Maryland. It was really us and Border Patrol agents and ICE members and sheriffs. And so to be able to talk to those sheriffs that are on the front lines of this fight, even in Maryland and North Carolina, and then to see what was going on with these sheriffs that are actually on the border, to have them talk about what's going on and to be able to experience some of that with them was just, like I said, it's one of those opportunities that I'm so glad that I took. It changed my life. And so I am looking forward to we're having conversations already with some of them down there to say, look, I want to bring 4 or 5 of my community members because I think it's transformational. It's something that we need to start educating our community about, and it's something we have to start talking about. This is something they're talking about that we will face us for the next 20 years. The last 4 years will impact us for the next 20. And so we just need to be ahead of these conversations to be able to say, listen, it's messy, it's hard, but this in reality is what's going on. And so how do we deal with this? How do we do it in a way that's compassionate, but yet doesn't compromise our values as Americans? Well,
because when people start talking about this issue, they get called names, they get called racist and xenophobic and all that stuff nowadays. But this is not an issue of race so much as it's an issue of national security, protecting our citizens. I just saw last night where an illegal immigrant from Honduras had murdered someone this past week in Carthage, stole their car, dumped the body off on the side of the road, and headed up to Independence, Missouri. So this issue of what's happening down in Texas and on the southern border, this is something that's going to affect Americans all over the U.S. It turns every state into a border state, as they say.
Yeah, and everybody says that, right? I remember hearing that often and thinking, wow, I love that. Every state a border state, but now what? What does that really look like in principle, especially when your federal government is committing a sin of omission and really not doing their job? So now that becomes the state's responsibility. And as a representative, a senator representing the people, that becomes my responsibility to kind of have these conversations internally and as a community to say, this in reality is happening. We cannot turn a blind eye to it. And I don't care what name you call me. You cannot, once you see what you see, you cannot unsee it. And so it is the reality and a hard conversation to have, but one well worth having.
And that's why you wanted to see it with your own eyes, because you didn't want to go off of hearsay, even just what the media is telling us is what's happening. You wanted to see this for yourself.
And I was always reluctant. People would ask, about what about the border? What about the border? And I'm all about securing the border. Who isn't? But to go down there or to take something off social media and run with it, I don't feel like it's good stewardship. So taking 3 days out of your day to, out of your schedule to run down there, it was something I really felt like I needed to do, especially with session coming up and some of these other issues that we're starting to see. And so I always go back to, I do not lack compassion, but I will say you lack compassion if you break my door down, if you break my
Right.
window, and you come into my home. So it was a Democrat president that set a cap on how many immigrants could come into our country. This is a bipartisan conversation. It's one that needs to happen. And like I said, I'm just on fire about it.
Yeah. Well, thank you for going down there and getting the full picture for yourself and being able to come back and report to us about that, because this is something people need to hear about. And let's talk about Amendment 3 too, because this is coming up here in, I think it's 45 days away at the time we're recording this, until Election Day.
Yeah, November 5th.
And so something on the ballot in Missouri is Amendment 3. And what's your message about Amendment 3?
Amendment 3, I would say to the average person out there that this is not a return to Roe v. Wade, right? And I think on the 3,000-foot level, that's what everybody is thinking this is. I am very pro-life, unapologetically. A mom of 5 kids. One of them is special needs. I have a special needs son. So I think we need to do a better job, actually, about having the life conversation and wrapping our community around women who are confronting that issue. But at the same time, this is not a return to Roe v. Wade. The language in this amendment is so vague, it will open up Pandora's box to our vulnerable youth on so many levels.
Not just on abortion, but in regards to parental rights and transgenderism. And so we'll talk about all that. Let's start with abortion. What are the laws right now in Missouri in regards to abortion, and how would Amendment 3 change that right off the bat?
So no taxpayer-funded abortions. No abortions unless it's for the life of the mother. And that's where the biggest shift will occur. Is we don't even, with the definition of this, it talks about fetal viability. So this will bring abortion up to birth. I mean, you could be in the delivery room having a child and decide you don't want to have that child, and you can abort it.
So it just jumps to pretty much the absolute extreme in regards to abortion. It turns Missouri into basically the bluest blue states' laws on how they would treat abortion. It would just replicate that here.
Yes. So not only does it do that, but the definitions of what qualifies as extraordinary medical measures is left to be interpreted to the courts. It also takes away civil liability for any harm to a woman that occurs. So you're opening, essentially, with this amendment, you are opening up, imagine, those back alley abortions that people used to have. It does not have to be, the abortions do not have to be performed by a doctor.
Really?
No, just somebody who has a certificate, right? Somebody who, that could be your dental hygienist, right? So these definitions, again, these definitions are so vague that, I mean, it's astounding, honestly. It's hard to comprehend how we got this vague a language in, and we're adding it to our most fundamental document.
Right, the Constitution of Missouri. This
is not a law. This is something that will be codified into our state constitution. And once we do that, it's very difficult to change.
Yep. So I know this got on the ballot in the first place because they got signatures from enough people to put it on the ballot. Probably for them to get those signatures, they had to use this vague language just in order to convince people to sign on to it. If people knew what this really was going to do, they probably never would have signed for it in the first place, a lot of them. So
this was the signatures were gathered under the guise of reproductive freedom, right? They didn't say, they're not talking about abortions. It's reproductive freedom, which is another one of the very vague languages. Words have meanings, right? Words have power. And so to say reproductive freedom, I think a lot of people just signed the petition because they were like, do you believe in reproductive freedom? Well, certainly, but this goes way beyond the scope of anything that we've ever seen before. And this is an erosion of parental rights, because you do not have to, there is no delay. It talks about, in the language of the amendment, it talks about how there can be no delay or essentially any interference by government. So it takes away the 72-hour wait time that we currently have in place. It takes away parent notification and consent. It takes away age restrictions. So if you have a 10-year-old or a 12-year-old that happened to be pregnant, that all goes away. And so they don't have to notify parents, they don't have to get consent, and there's no delay.
So a teenage child, I mean, a teenager is still a minor, a teenager could go in and obtain an abortion and their parents might never know about it, never even need to be notified.
Exactly. I mean, consider this. Our kids can't even go, they can't get, not that we want this necessarily, but they can't get a tattoo.
Right.
They can't get their ears pierced. They can't drive a car until they're 16. All of those things that are minors, we have laws for our minors to protect them simply because they don't have life experience. And yet we're with this amendment, we're enshrining the ability for them to go in and get a life-altering medical procedure without parent notification or consent.
So, I mean, like I said before, this just goes to the extreme end of basically taking any regulations off of abortion through the language of this Amendment 3. And so it's a threat to parental rights. It's dangerous for kids in that way, too. And also, there's something here about the transgenderism issue and a lot of these gender identity things that we see coming up that it affects parental rights in that way, too, from what I understand. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah. So last year, we passed a bill that would protect the SAFE Act, that would protect minors from these transgender surgeries, mutilation surgeries. And we also blocked the ability for minors to receive those hormone blocking medications until they're of age, giving them time to develop and really kind of become the person that they want to be. This will erode all of that under the guise of reproductive health, right? That's the definition. This is a reproductive freedom bill amendment into our Constitution. So under the guise of that, reproductive health really is left up to the interpretation of the person that wants to do whatever they want to do, the beholder, so to speak.
So they could take this amendment and apply this to try to undo the SAFE Act, make it to where children can receive these puberty blockers and things like that again.
Yes, without parent notification or consent again.
Wow. Okay, so this is a very big deal. This would bring a lot of change to our state. A lot of the progress that you've made up at Jefferson City to try to get these protections for kids and families, this would immediately try to do away with a lot of that. And so we need to tell voters who are people listening to the radio right now, they need to vote no on this thing.
Yes, definitely. Like I said, it does not have to be, even if you were to get an abortion, it does not have to be done by a doctor. It could be done by any quote unquote medical professional, which again, that's a very broad term. Look it up. So that's a very broad term. There is no liability for harm done to a woman. I will go so far to say that this will undermine children and women's health. These safeguards that we've put in place for medical practices are eroded with this amendment.
Wow. Okay. Well, our listeners there, you've gotten the lowdown on the border today. You've gotten the lowdown on what Amendment 3 is all about. And so we encourage our listeners to be taking notes on this, informing your neighbors. We're going to put this on our Community Connection podcast. And please share this out and get the word out about what is going to be on the ballot this fall, because this is a very big deal. Missourians need to be aware. And we've been speaking today with Senator Jill Carter. And Senator Carter, if people want to keep up with you and the information that you're putting out there, I know you'll be sharing more about the border and this Amendment 3 issue in the future. Where can people stay up to date with you?
Yeah, so just go to jillforsenate.com. We post a lot of our stuff on there. We have got an infographic on the amendment, how we got here. Initiative petition reform is something, if we don't want to keep seeing things like this, we saw the marijuana issue, now we're seeing this abortion issue,
right.
reproductive rights issue. If we don't want to continue to see millions of dollars being poured in to erode our most fundamental document, we have got to have initiative petition or concurrent majority ratification reform.
All right. Well, thank you for listening today, and we're going to go back to our regular programming. Senator Jill Carter, thanks again for sharing with us.
Thank you so much.